Wade Killefer, FAIA, 2021 AIA President, founder of KFA Architecture. Take it away, Wade.
Good morning, AIA Los Angeles. Welcome to 1.5 degrees Celsius, an AIA COAT Symposium on Climate Change. It's heartening to see so much interest in architecture's capabilities to reduce and mitigate climate change in one Zoom room. I want to thank the AIALA Committee on the Environment for programming such an in-depth look at this topic. Conferences offering detailed expertise on areas that are essential to planetary and community well-being are an essential function of the AIA Los Angeles. The COAT committee, led by Chair Ismar Enriquez, AIA Lead AP, and Vice Chair Miranda Gardner, Associate AIA, and past Chair James Donaldson, has meticulously organized today's and next week's agenda. If you're a committee member on the Zoom call right now, raise your hand so we can see you. Everybody take a look at your screen. These are the AIA COAT committee members. Thank you. I want to recognize the AIALA staff for their involvement in this and the more than 150 programs AIA members participate in throughout the year. This year's 1.5 degrees centigrade conference is set apart by three overarching conditions. Number one, added peril. This year, the conference, which was originally named 2 degrees Celsius, was retitled 1.5 degrees in recognition of the dropping ceiling. In 4 slight years, the global wiggle room for the future of humanity has diminished. Number two, new hope. America has rejoined the Paris Accords. For the last 4 years, mayors and governors across the country have expressed commitment to the benchmarks of the Accord in the absence of national leadership. But today, as a nation, climate change is a priority for the federal government of the United States. Number three, COVID-19 and Zoom. A global tragedy has connected us all deeply through experience and technology. Yes, Zoom exhausts us, but this conference is an example of what it does best, to reach and connect brain trusts and different perspectives. Here in California, we look forward to meeting you, speakers from the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, England, states across America, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and cities like San Francisco. Today at 1.5 degrees Celsius, a symposium on climate change, we have a keynote by someone who is co-negotiator of the Paris Accord, Britain's Farhana Yaman, an AIA fellow who has influenced the United Nations, Ed Mazria, and a policy who has critical purviews here in Los Angeles, Elizabeth Rhodes. So let's get going. Ismar, you are up.
Ismar, you're muted.
Thank you. It happens, right? To the best of us, Wade. I appreciate that, but good morning, everybody. I hope you're all having a good morning or a good day, wherever you may be. Welcome and thank you for joining our 4th annual 1.5 degrees Celsius Symposium on Climate Change. Before we begin, I would like to ask everybody for a 15-second moment of silence. And remember, as of today, the 520 lives lost in the US and the 2.7 million people that have been lost around the world during this pandemic, as well as remember the people that have lost their lives to racial injustices such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more. So please, let's take 15 seconds for a moment of silence. Thank you. It is hard to imagine that we will start the symposium with this, but it is also hard not to. To say this has been an unprecedented year would be an understatement as we start out 2021. This year has changed the way we live, the way we work, and the way we relate to one another. But this year has also shown us that when we come together and focus on solutions, we can mobilize and overcome massive challenges. We have figured out a way to work from our dens, closets, and in backyards. We saw a vaccine come to fruition in less than a year. In the US, up to 2 million people are being vaccinated each day. We've witnessed organizations make pledges to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our group has been working hard and brought together a symposium that reflects inclusivity and equity reflected through a diverse group of speakers and leaders. We are humbled and appreciative of their participation, as well as yours. You are the most important ingredient in the recipe for success. We have an exciting 2-day conference that reflects the most relevant dialogues in society and has incorporated this thinking around climate action and climate justice. Today, we will explore from different perspectives and scales, solutions and ideas for a carbon neutral tomorrow and reimagine the future of resiliency. We will have the opportunity to dive deeper into these conversations through a series of 29 launching sessions following panel 2. But none of this would have been made available without the support of our sponsors, and we'd like to thank them. And then as a champion sponsor, we'd like to thank Unibel Rabonco Westfield, Student Scholarship, HDR, HED, Friends of 1.5 degrees Celsius, PBS Engineering, Peril Happel, Mover Udell Architects and Planners, Steiner Hart, Gensler, Brooks Carpa, Henderson Engineering, Hayworth, and Tortigalas and Partners. I'd like to thank our exhibitors, Carbon Cure and Dull Tile. And we'd like to thank our participating sponsors, Givning, American Institute of Steel Construction, Armstrong Steelings, Aaa Abloy, DPR Construction, Engelkirk Structural Engineers, and Near International. And on behalf of our AIA Los Angeles chapter, we would like to thank our annual sponsors, co-sponsors, Gruen and Associates, Southern California Edison, silver sponsors, AC Martin, co-architects, Gensler, HKS, KAA, Eher Architects LA, LG Business Solutions, SOM, and CGF. Bronze sponsors, Bernard's Construction, Collins Muir & Stewart, Clark Construction, John A. Martin and Associates, KPFF, Killefer Flameng Architects, Moore Udell Architects and Planners, Mac Construction, Woods Baggett. And without any further ado, please welcome our first keynote speaker. She is a lawyer, activist, expert, advisor to Climate Parliament Forum. Please welcome Farhana Yamin, founder and CEO of Track Zero. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really moved and touched to be here, and I really want to say a huge thank you to the huge numbers of people that have put this together. I've been dealing with Corinne and Jessica and Ismar and Ty Lanning, who originally suggested that I do this, and Ed Masrio, who'll speak after me. And I think I may have met many of you this time last year, literally this time last year. I was in LA waiting for my flight to come back to the UK after having been at the very successful Carbon Positive event that Ed spoke at. And we were all at that time, you know, in a very different world, very aware of COVID, you know, sanitizing our hands and so forth, but, you know, not quite grasping how much the world would change. So thank you for having me back and for allowing me to give a keynote. I really miss the in-person meetings because there would be so many opportunities to have, you know, little plotting conversations, little heart-to-hearts, things where we share the dilemmas that are facing us personally and professionally. And we can't do that, you know, in the same way. So we're going to have to do it in plenary. And everything I say, I'm saying to you as a friend and an ally and someone who's in a profession, law, which is not that dissimilar to the professions that you're in as architects and designers and planners, you know, quite formidable profession with rules and a deep desire to also do good and a commitment to making the world a better place. But increasingly, I'm concerned at the role that we professionals play in the world and what the world is demanding of us right now and how we can help turn things around very quickly. I also want to say thank you to Wade. He very quickly highlighted, you know, why I couldn't use any of the slides really that I showed last year because we have responded to new science. We have got new hope, especially from the US. You know, it's just a deep sigh of relief. Thank you for returning a climate justice loving president and vice president and their team. And it's not just that they are affirming the science, they're also moving to a framing which is so different, at least what we hear. I'm sure there'll be many battles ahead, and I'll come to some of those a bit later. And it's very welcome that, you know, climate diplomacy from the US will resume in a very different shape and form than I've had to experience in the last 3 or 4 years. And of course in COVID. So let me start by sharing my screen. Where is it? Yeah. And I'm going to go through, I've got loads and loads of slides, but I will try and go through them as quickly as I can. And anyone who wants to is welcome to have them afterwards. There may still be a few typos. I was working on them till the last moment. So how do I change the slides now? Yeah. I have to use my mouse. So my main sort of message, you know, the big picture architectural goal in the Paris Agreement from a legal point of view is this net zero by mid-century, which has been taken and was originally based on getting to a global phase out by 2050 as affirmed by the science at that time. And moving that date forward essentially, because we have new realities and we're far, far behind. So I want to try and encourage and ask you all to start thinking about moving that date forward of making 2030 the new 2050 and see how we can all collectively help each other get there. So I think we're now much more aware that in the face of danger, we all have to think and do something very different. We're in emergency mode, we're in danger mode. All around us, every day there is news of another tipping point. We're at social tipping points too. So we do have to do something very different. I like this slide. I don't think I had it last year. You know, in LA, we were wondering, you know, and asking each other to wash our hands and very aware of what the COVID crisis was bringing. We hadn't yet really thought how big the recession would be. We're now beginning to realize it's, at least in the UK, the deepest recession since economic records began. So for hundreds of years, we have a full-blown climate crisis, which is already here. And there's a bigger nature crisis, which can be triggered and is being triggered in certain parts of the country, certain parts of the globe already. So these crises are all interlinked. A quick overview of this presentation. I'm going to talk about, are we on track? Are the government commitments, the net zero commitments that are outside that, the city corporate initiatives, are we on track? Are we building back better? Where do we need to be? How quickly can we change? I'm going to talk a little bit about COP26, this summit, which is the follow-up from Paris, which is going to be held now a year later in Glasgow still, and the new demands and expectations for that. And I'm going to pose some questions to you as a set of professionals. You know, is construction now the big oil? And, you know, by that I mean, are you going to become the new baddies? You know, we're very aware of how big a role the building sector, the built environment, construction, building, heating, how big a footprint in terms of carbon and materials it has. And I think more and more people are realizing that. And as other sectors decarbonize quite rapidly, or prospects for them to change grow, maybe you know, you might become the new corporate culprits, the targets of more campaigns. So I'll come back to that a bit later. So a very quick overview of Paris. I don't think many of you will need that, but we were supposed to take on and revise mitigation commitments more or less every 5 years, in line with changing science and in line with catching up with the lag in ambition in the previous decade. That's called the ratchet mechanism. And that's why Glasgow is so important. Glasgow was the place at which countries were supposed to come back 5 years after Paris and make good their commitments. And in Paris, the commitments that were tabled were highly inadequate. They were going to add up to around 2.7 degrees at the best. So 5 years ago, we walked out of Paris. You know, I felt proud of Paris, but very deeply sad that the commitments that underlay the government pledges were out of line with even the 2-degree target, let alone the 1.5 target, which was meant to be the best science at that time. There's also financial commitments which have been made, 100 billion. It sounds like a big figure, but it really isn't, which is meant to be given to all developing countries, especially poorer ones who are going through transition, who are going through adaptation, who are already facing loss and damage. So all of these are part and parcel of the Glasgow agreements conference. Climate risks. So this is, I think I don't need to go through this at all. You're very well aware that that 0.5 degrees, that tiny number, makes a huge difference. And in big picture terms, the emission story was that we were supposed to go to net zero globally by 2050 and to slash emissions by at least 45% by 2030. And those are global figures. So the richer countries and those who had contributed more were supposed to do these things faster in order to allow for growth, and for poorer countries to have what we call a grace period, to have a bit longer. So these are global phase out dates. The changing science, well, there's the IPCC 1.5 report that came out in 2018, which radicalized and changed this target of 2 degrees to 1.5 for nearly everyone. And a whole host of other reports, I've put up 4 or 5 here, that have all said the same thing, that nature, climate protection, and the protection of our societies, agriculture, food production is totally dependent on us making these transitions very quickly. So 5 years on, are we on track? No, we're not. No, we're not. We're nowhere near. So emissions fell by around just under 7% in 2020. And those were the kind of emissions, that's the scale of emissions we needed to have every single year in order to get to net zero by 2050. And to, so these are again, going through very quickly. All you have to do is look at all the red countries and the black, the countries that are grey, which don't have at the moment tabled commitments in line with climate science. This last 2 weeks has been pretty depressing because we've had 2 major reports that have come out. So one was the UNFCCC Secretariat, which did an assessment of all of the committed pledges, the revised pledges, the NDCs, the nationally determined commitments that countries had submitted, and over 75 countries sent in their revised plans under Paris 5 years on. And in a sum, the science said we needed up to 45% reductions by 2030, and we got 1%. We got 1% raise in the ambition from previous commitments. So that's how far we are off track at the moment. You know, increasingly our UN dignitaries, the Secretary General, Patricia Espinosa, who is the replacement to Christiana, they are shouting and screaming their loudest. They sound more and more like Greta by the day, saying that we're nowhere on track and we need to very quickly ramp up. Again, I won't go through this in that much more detail, but you can see that the areas that are colored in blue are the ones that have these revisions and these net zero goals. And some of the countries have 2060 targets, for example, China. So we're very pleased that it's made that commitment, but it's just also released in the last day or so. It's more detailed national plan, and it's really not sufficient. So what about non-state actors, what we call businesses, cities? Increasingly, those are the actors that we look to deliver in a more speedy way, to deliver more ambition. And since Paris, we've had a great deal of effort from all sides in trying to get faster, quicker action at the city, local authority, state, and subnational level. And businesses have indeed stepped up. But again, in very big picture terms, we're so far behind. So the number of cities who haven't made that effort or who are so far behind their stated implementation goal outnumbers and outweighs those who are achieving their goals or in line with science. You may not be able to see, all of the tiny writing here on your screens, but if you look on the left-hand side, the little circles, the bits that are in blue show things that are on track, and everything else that's in gray is not on track. So you can see just proportionately, yeah, we're not making so much progress. Okay, so COVID and the opportunity this brings, and it is an opportunity despite the havoc, the heartache, the loss of lives. It is an opportunity to do things differently. It's a massive opportunity in terms of the huge financial resources that have been used to address the health emergency in ways that protect people. This was an opportunity to bring the different threads together, to build back better is the phrase that started to be used. Lots of reports came out, very quickly highlighting the triple wins that there were to nature, to environment, to social equality if we invested those vast sums of money, those trillions that Biden is trying to get passed through Congress and Senate right now, and which we've all committed to. And are they building back better? What have we done in this last year? Well, in a nutshell, no, we haven't been able to use those stimulus package to really change the underlying trajectory, to really change business as usual in a big enough way. There have obviously been some countries that have done better than others, but the big picture is global emissions are back on track with the trajectory they were a year ago before COVID started, which was upward. So this was an IEA report, which is published 2 days ago, on March the 2nd, showing that emissions are creeping back up. Sorry, I'm having a clicking problem. So where do we need to be? This report by WRI came out in December. Again, it's sort of depressing or good, depending on what kind of outlook you have on life. It said very quickly, we can do this. It's all totally doable. We're not waiting for some new technology to be invented here. We can ramp up renewables, but we have to do that at 6 times the speed. We can transition to electric vehicles. They're here already, but we have to do it 22 times faster. Tree cover 5 times faster. Phasing out coal power. The UN Secretary General has again this week said every coal power station must be phased out, and coal power phased out by 2030. In the UK, we're about to build a new we're about to open a new coal mine. So these are the sorts of things that ought to be happening, but which are not happening consistently or happening in fits and starts. A report that came out, which was more optimistic, which was intended and does give hope, I think. It shows that that we can get to the Paris goals and at the same time create millions and millions of jobs, and we can do that more or less with the technologies that are here already. So this is a report by Systemic, which is an organization that I'm an advisor to, and it said in 2020 low carbon solutions are competitive in sectors representing over 25% of emissions already, and that building net zero economies will add over 35 million jobs, and that most of these sectors already have the solutions there. I'm going to skip a couple of these more detailed slides, and I'm sure that Ed may be able to pick up some of the details. So what about the buildings and construction sector, the sectors that you all work in, and you're, as I said, our allies here, and you're the good guys listening into this conference for 2 days over this week. Well, this sector is a huge sector, and it's a sector that's critical to lock in. And you're going to take up the biggest share of energy use. You already have that share. Increasingly also questions are being asked, especially by younger professionals, not just in this world, but also in the legal world. What is our role, in carbon intensive projects, in promoting the underlying consumption and production of goods and services that is causing that business as usual trajectory where we're not kicking and transforming our economies. And the speed with which carbon intensity and the use of materials has to go is not going fast enough. I'm going to speed up, and I also, my watch, I need to look at my stop clock, which has stopped. Okay, so moving on to the COP26 agenda. Okay, so COP26, people don't, there's a massive governmental negotiation. In essence, think of Congress and Senate combined, you know, slugging it out in terms of drafting a bill together. And that's what happens with regards to COP decisions, but it's 196 odd countries, including, thankfully, now that the US is back in. And we're supposed to agree, the formal negotiating part, supposed to agree on a number of things that were essential to the Paris package, which is agreeing on the use of carbon offsets and carbon markets, agreeing common timelines for these NDCs, these national plans, which is made more complicated now because we've essentially lost a year, and the Paris timetable of it, you know, doing things every 5 years and listening to the science is a bit off track. And the stock take, the global stock take, was this massive opportunity that was built up in 2023 to take into account the newest science and do that. So you can see that all of these are sort of compressed, and we'll have to figure out how to get governments to revise and ratchet up their emissions, and especially now that we know that they are so far off track. So there's a lot of different complicated rules that have to be sorted out. And this finance and solidarity package, so the kinds of countries that I represent, the vulnerable countries, are increasingly looking to the COP and are raising the issue of loss and damage and of finance. And they're spiraling into a massive debt crisis. This is what's going on in the world outside Europe and the rest of the world, where you don't also have COVID vaccinations. So the health and recession impacts are going to continue into 2022 and 2023. And, you know, they're borrowing money to try and get vaccinations. At the same time, there's a COP which is about the big message that is sent to the public, to businesses, to different stakeholders, and public concern about climate action is very, very high, and expectations are very, very high. And even the UN Secretary General, as I said, has joined in the calls, which were originally made a year or two ago, requiring us to act in an emergency and declaring a climate and ecological emergency. So public expectations all around the world are very, very high, and they're expecting COP26 and the other UN processes that are related to that to really deliver on saving nature, on giving our ecosystems a chance, and of turning emissions and bending those emission curves. So there's a lot of high expectations for that. And some of these expectations were raised because of the movements, the social movements that arose from 2018 onwards, you know, Sunrise Movement, you know, occupying the house of the Nancy Pelosi. So I reckon you wouldn't have Biden in the White House, and you wouldn't have Kamala Harris, and you wouldn't have had a Democratic win if it wasn't for the climate movement. There's a lot of analysis showing that the climate issue swung key electorates and key states, because younger voters, marginalized communities who are resisting, actually voted sort of Democrat. So especially in the US, there's a very high expectation that you will deliver massive change this year, and absolutely behind that. The same thing, that's me lying on the floor there a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, demanding action by polluters, and the Extinction Rebellion and student strikes have had a massive impact. So all of these expectations are there, but at the same time, there is a huge division in societies about the pace at which this change happens, and the just transition, and who really will benefit from this switch to cleaner, greener technologies. Not everyone is convinced that they will benefit. And you have still climate denialism, fascism, racism. In some cases, there's a toxic mix and overlapping groups who are attacking those who are championing solutions. So by all means, it's not clear cut that, you know, the gateway to change in the US and here, I live in a Brexit country, we've Brexited now, is that straightforward. There's also new things that are happening. I've got, I think, 2 or 3 minutes, so I hope I'm okay for time, but, you know, please let me know if that's not the case. So lawyers, you know, we love to think, you know, we're the good guys, a lot of us, and that we've been helping. And there's been a lot more interest in litigation, especially as a result of the fight back against climate denialism and being log jammed in legislatures. So lots of really important historic wins. There's also a new trend, and this is the one I want to draw to your attention and you know, have a little bit of a discussion about. So increasingly younger members of the legal profession, you know, are questioning and are naming and shaming members of their own profession for taking part, for being complicit, for aiding the climate intensive economy, for showing, you know, the vast amounts of money that the legal profession is dependent on when it supports, you know, huge corporations. You may see there that, you know, some of the lawyers from XR, they demonstrated outside the Law Society last year, and they also did a die-in outside the company called Slaughter and May, one of our biggest law firms. And these young students, Law Students for Climate Accountability, they published a report which where they name and shame and they rank from A to F, you know, law firms that are directly dependent on supporting fossil fuel projects and fossil fuel transactions. So in closing, you know, I want to ask, you know, questions of you. As I said, the building sector is a big source of emissions. It's a big source of locked in long-term emissions. You know, when you build a building, it's for 30 to 80 years. It can't just be, you know, switched on and off. It's there. And, you know, people are beginning to ask, you know, what is also the role of your professions in continuing to build, you know, massive carbon intensive, often luxury and projects, airports, you know, ports, pipelines, you know, you all take part. What is the role now of, you know, building new buildings when there are so many old buildings that are disused or underused, or which could be refurbished? And potentially, what are the implications, the longer term implications of this shift in modalities, the shift in, you know, in transport, commuting? So everybody is asking these professions. I want to end on a couple of things that have happened here, so which are similar as well in the legal profession. You know, what projects are architects and the construction industry saying no to? You know, if we're continuing with business as usual, what does ending business as usual in your profession look like, in your firm look like? How can we get to where we need to be if we're still on that pipeline? And the pipeline seems to never stop. The pipeline of projects never seems to stop. And there's always someone else who could, you know, there's always a good reason to say, okay, this one's really important, we'll make the change for the next one, or we'll wait for regulations, or we'll wait for, what are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? So I put that up because one of the things that happened, and I think this is the final slide, or the next to final slide, is that in this country, not just Extinction Rebellion, but a whole load of initiatives grew up in 2019 and took shape and did work in 2020, such as Architects Declares, Construction Declares, Culture Declares, which was museums and others acting together. And they're trying to essentially galvanize and support a radical shift in their professions. And some of those initiatives, you know, also relied on declarations, voluntary pledges and so forth. So the question that, you know, is now coming up is, what does it really mean to have declared a climate and ecological emergency? What are the things that are being supported as well as not supported? Should we still be focusing on declarations, or should we be working on, you know, things which are harder and require regulation of our own profession, as well as regulation from legislators and policymakers. And there were a lot of declarations that were also made by the construction and architects community in the last year or so. And are they going to be delivered, and how are they going to be delivered? How is the 2030 going to become the new 2050? So I leave you, and this is my final story, I'll leave you with lots of ideas for discussion, including what kind of disruption is needed now. I glued myself to Shell. I took part in all of those protests. My children all did too. They were mostly school-age children, and we made a lot of asks of governments, and governments haven't delivered and are not delivering enough. So what is it that we can now do? I'm asking you, and how can we support each other, and how can we use the fact that many cities, many states have made these emergency declarations, have moved forward, have got these national action plans, and how can we better support the new kind of regenerative city models, the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood where no one has to travel or commute past that. So I think I've left the one thought hanging in the air there, but maybe that's a good time for me to stop and to hand over to Ed, who I'm sure will answer some of those questions better than I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhana. That was a great presentation. Please, let's welcome internationally recognized architect, author, researcher, educator, AIA Gold Medal winner, Edward Masria, founder and CEO of Architecture 2030. And take it away.
Thank you. Let me unmute. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
We're all set. Great. So I'll pick up where Farhana left off. That was terrific. And Farhana's been an incredible inspiration and a great colleague over the years. So the first thing we need to realize is, and Farhana put it really beautifully, is that we're in a climate emergency. And that's going to dictate a lot of what we do. And she talked about 2030 being the new 2050. The 2030 date is really critical now. And so timing is everything. I want to put that in context and give you just a little more detail on that about why. You've all heard about carbon budgets, but here's really what you need to know. This is the report that Farhana was talking about. And here you can see this was the 1.5. So how do you meet the 1.5? This talks about carbon budgets. So this was from January 1st, 2018. So to have a good, a good probability, 67% chance of getting to that 1.5, you can see down here, the carbon budget is 420 gigatons of CO2. However, that was January 1st, 2018. We've used up about 80 of those gigatons already in 2 years. We're using about 40 gigatons a year. So from January 1st, 2020, the carbon budget left that we have for the 1.5 for a good probability is 340 gigatons. So the question is, what does that mean? How do we do it? And all that. So here we are, we're using about 40 gigatons a year. This year we'll use about 8% less than that. So we're on a track down for 1 year at least. But to get to that 340 gigatons, we need to peak emissions in 2020, and we hope that that forward. You've all heard about the 2050 date that Farhana talked about, that's out the window. That's because from 2020 to 2050 is 600 gigatons. That's almost double the budget that we have left. That's why 2050 is gone. So we need to reduce emissions from 2020's levels by 65%. Farhana talked about the 45% by 2030. That was 45% from 2010 levels. So from today's levels, because we increased, we now have to actually, we have a bigger load to carry. So it's a 65% by 2030. And then the phase out date is 2040 for all emissions. The question is, can we meet that? Well, let's look at California. So this is California electricity consumption going back to 1990 all the way to 2019. And you can see that electricity consumption in the residential and commercial sector has leveled out. It's not going down, but it is at least leveled out. So every time we add renewables, as long as we don't increase our electricity consumption, we drive emissions down. However, with the transportation sector now electrifying, they're taking up a lot of the new renewables. This is LA County, and we can see it follows California in terms of electricity consumption. It's flat, but it has not gone down. Okay, let's look at gas consumption, because this is burning natural gas on site, fossil fuels direct to the atmosphere. We can see that in California, gas consumption has flattened out in the commercial sector and in the residential sector. It went down for a period, but it's come right back up. And the only reason it went down is because California had some record warm years, and we didn't need gas heating during that period. But it's essentially flat. So we are not reducing the direct emissions from natural gas in burning natural gas in buildings. If we look at LA County, we see exactly the same thing. Residential gas consumption, again, is flat. Commercial actually going up, and that is not a good sign. If we look at California's emissions, the last data we got was 2018, and you can see it went up slightly, came back down, and it's pretty flat. We have a ways to go. Okay, so can we meet now the 1.5? This is the question that everybody's asking now. And how does our sector do it, which is the largest energy consuming and emissions sector, the built environment? It's what we design, plan, design, and specify. So there are three things we need to do. We need to address new buildings, building operations, existing buildings, building operations, and then all the materials, construction, and infrastructure that connects up all the buildings, sidewalks and bridges, roads, power plants, you name it. Everything that we manufacture that goes to the building sector, we have to address those three elements. Let's first talk about building operations and how we do this. So first, new building operations. In 2018, we developed a zero carbon code, a national and international standard, and with support from the California Energy Commission and the governor's office at that time, which was Jerry Brown, we developed a zero code specifically for California with time-dependent source value, because California is like its own country, has its own code. And so we had to develop something specifically for California. That was in 2018. In 2018, we also went to Beijing to present the California Zero Code. We took Charles Ely, who actually developed most of the code from California. Charles and I went, you see, we're wearing masks, but COVID hadn't hit yet. That was from the pollution. Everyone had a mask on in Beijing on that day. It cleared up a few days later. But we presented the California Zero Code, and China looks to California. So that's why we presented the California Zero Code. Within a year, China developed their own zero carbon code standard called Nearly Zero Energy Buildings plus on-site and off-site renewables. They haven't implemented it yet. They're waiting for California to implement it, but they've developed it almost immediately. So what is a zero code? What is a zero carbon code? A zero carbon code is you design an energy efficient building. You use the code standard that's in place, because they're all very efficient, and you get an efficient building if you meet the latest code standard. There's no magic to it. So you design to the latest code standard, and then you add either on-site renewables as much as you can to generate energy and store some of that energy. And then if you need to make up the difference, then you go to off-site, but off-site new renewables. So you're not using up renewables from the grid, for example. What that does is it creates jobs and a predictable and reliable market for renewable energy, because we know how much we build roughly on an annual basis. Where's all of this construction going to take place? This is really critical, because in the next 10 years, as we come out of COVID, you're going to see in the global north, those big red dots. That's where most of the construction is going to take place. After that initial period of construction, when we come out of COVID, right after that, it moves to the global south, and Africa explodes, India explodes, and you see construction really happening. So what happens in the global north, in the US, in Europe, and in China is critical for influencing what happens in the global south, which is the next wave, which comes after. We must set the example. The reason is, this is where building codes are. In blue, you actually have a building code, energy code. In gray, there's nothing, no codes. And you can see in the global south, that's where it is. So if we don't set the example with really good codes and adopt zero carbon code standards almost immediately within this next year, before the COP26 in Glasgow, we've got to be able to show that we're doing this, so that when construction moves into the global south, they're ready for it. And we have a huge opportunity. LA has the biggest opportunity to implement a zero code right now. The reason is your mayor is really head of the C40, and those are cities all over the world. If LA adopts, you can bet your boots that cities, all members of the C40, are going to rush to adopt zero carbon code standards. So what you have to know is that what happens in LA and in California goes global. You have a huge responsibility to take the initiative. Why? Because you put yourself in that position. Okay, now let's go to existing buildings. I've made my point with that. Existing buildings, building operations. This is the next big chunk of the pie. How do we get to existing buildings? Obviously, we have trillions of square feet of existing buildings. We need to get existing buildings to zero carbon. How do we do that? Well, with efficiency, we renovate for efficiency. We electrify those buildings, get rid of on-site fossil fuels, and use renewables, because all buildings use energy, and we want them to use non-CO2 emitting energy. That's the formula: efficiency, electrification, and renewables. And so how do we do that? Well, you need to look at a city. So let's look first at New York City. We see that all those big buildings, you see them kind of popping up in the pulled out version. All of that is New York City, by the way. The boundaries of New York City is even larger than that. So all the big buildings in New York, over 50,000 square feet, for example, are less than 2% of total buildings. So only a handful of buildings are these humongous buildings. And that small percentage of buildings is responsible for almost half of all building sector greenhouse gas emissions in New York City. That is a few buildings, and you got half of all the emissions. Well, does that hold true in other places? It holds true in Chicago. You can see all the big buildings along the waterfront, and then miles of small buildings. It holds true in Madrid, downtown, big buildings. It holds true in Los Angeles. Look at the big buildings and then miles of small buildings. South Korea, same thing. You look at the waterfront in Nagasaki, you see all the big buildings, and then in the hills, miles and miles of small buildings. You got the same pattern in Long Beach. Along the waterfront, huge buildings, then miles and miles of small buildings. Those huge buildings are responsible for a huge portion of greenhouse gas emissions of the building sector. So with that in mind, now you have a big buildings and small buildings policy. For the big buildings, you only have a few buildings. You require them to get this to zero carbon by 2030. So you get a big chunk of the emissions out of the existing building sector by 2030. Who has the money? Who owns the biggest buildings? Those are the people with money that can afford to get to zero emissions. How do they do that? They renovate down when they hit a capital improvement cycle, and then they do on-site and or buy off-site new renewable energy. That's how you get them to zero carbon. It's not a big lift because there are so few of them. Then you address the other hundreds of thousands, even in New York City, 1 million small buildings, and you do that at building intervention points, point of sale. Every time a building turns over, you require them to get to zero carbon. They can buy it, they can renovate, they can put on, add solar, financing options. When you're going for a zoning or use change or equipment replacement, you do the same thing. That's how you get at the entire existing building sector. Okay, the last leg of the stool here, third, materials, construction, and infrastructure. We've only recently discovered this in 2018 when we presented it in San Francisco, in California, at a climate summit that was held there. We basically brought attention to it. Why has that taken so long for us to get a handle on? Because there are literally hundreds of thousands of materials to choose from when designing any building or infrastructure project. So how do you get all of these materials, hundreds of thousands, millions of different product manufacturers, materials in each category? How do you get them to zero carbon? Well, this is the way we usually see CO2 emissions by sector. You see building operations, we talked about that. Everything else falls either in transportation or mostly in industry. And that's infrastructure, that's building structure, that's substructure, enclosure, finishes, equipment, lighting systems, HVAC, you name it, all fall, forks and spoons and books and laptops, all fall in the industrial sector. Trying to get a handle on that is huge. So what we did is we did what we did with big buildings and small buildings. Pull out the big emitters. There's only 2 of them. There's actually 3, but 2 really. Concrete and steel are responsible for half of all industrial emissions. We get a handle on that, we make huge gains, and then we have time for everybody else to fall into place. It's not rocket science. So now what? How do we get it? How do we do that? Well, the first thing we have to do is change the conversation, and we began changing that conversation in 2018, and boy, has that taken off. In mainstream media now, all of a sudden, concrete, the most destructive material on the planet, steel makers, next in the crosshairs as climate pressure grows. So everybody now knows we've got to get concrete and steel. Before nobody knew, now everybody knows. It's common knowledge now, and we actually have a competitor. Structural wood, cross-laminated timber, mass timber is giving concrete and steel heartburn because they're beginning to take market share. And if they're done right and sustainably forested, then they're actually carbon sequestering materials. There's a whole, that's a whole nother discussion, and we're working on that as we speak. So now what? Okay, we know those two, that we have to get a handle on those two. So what do we do? And I was just asked that question online. We reuse, we reduce, and we sequester. By reuse, what do we mean by reuse? That is, repurpose existing urban areas. Don't tear them down and rebuild them. You save all that concrete and steel and everything else and build around it. Use the infrastructure that exists. Use all the existing buildings now. We're going to have to repurpose them because of COVID and redo interiors and stuff. We want to adapt these buildings rather than tear them down. And then if we do new buildings, design them so that they can be deconstructed, or reuse materials that come from other buildings and incorporate them whenever possible. What about reduce? Well, it's everything from growth boundaries, so we're not expanding the infrastructure and we don't have sprawl. Densify, we know that density is not a COVID spreader. There have been many studies on that now. It's overcrowding, it's not density. Optimizing structure, the structural engineers have an important part in this. And we can specify low to zero carbon materials, and all sorts of programs now have been developed with LCAs and everything to help us do this. and we're beginning to see policies. The last thing that we can do is sequester. Actually design with carbon sequestering materials. So we talked about a sustainable, cross and glue laminated wood. Well, now in the global south, we're beginning to see talk about glue laminated and cross laminated bamboo, which grows really quickly. It's a grass. In 2-3 years, you can harvest it and create carbon sequestering materials. We have now a way to actually create aggregate to put into concrete from CO2, changes its properties, becomes aggregate, and it's gone. We can inject it into the concrete mix, for example, CO2. We're starting to see now full cycle plants of actually creating the material, the cement, and then injecting the CO2 from that into the concrete, and then biomaterials is also important, and then landscape and soils. So can we meet the 1.5 degrees C carbon budget? Of course we can. Solar is now the cheapest electricity in history. Battery power is coming down to where it's now competitive with natural gas. It's actually cheaper in China to actually put up a solar system and pay for that than it is to buy electricity off the grid in almost every city in China now. And we're seeing now in 2021, for example, how much solar and wind we're adding now to the grid compared to everything else. Almost 75% of every gigawatt that we add now is renewables. We need not to add gas though. That's critical. So where are we? Let's finish up. So this is actual. This is the building sector in the US. The building sector is actually 30% down from 2005 levels. We have not only met our initial NDC for in Paris, where we said we'd be 26 to 28%. The country's around 21%, 22%, something like that, but 30% we are leading. Our sector is leading. We're down 30% from 2005 levels now. If Biden makes good and the Congress makes good on its pledge for a clean grid by 2035, and we just incorporate, that'll get us 60% of the way there by 2030. And with some of the other policies in place and city policies, we should get down to at least 72% and begin to phase out by the year 2030. We have to take this to Glasgow and talk about every building sector in the world actually moving in this direction and getting to zero, getting the big reductions, 55 to 65% by 2030 and zero by 2040. We'll take all of that and the best that we have out there all over the world and present that prior to the Glasgow meeting at a pre-COP summit in October, and then take out of that a communique to give to the countries in the COP right after the summit. So stay tuned. That ends my presentation.
Thanks. Thank you, Ed. That was wonderful. So much information in that presentation. Farhana's clapping. It's amazing how you two were able to build on top of each other, off of each other. But we'll have a very special surprise announcement by Brett Doherty, AIA California President. Brett, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Doherty, and I'm the 2021 President of the AIA California. I want to thank you for letting me join you during this amazing symposium for a few minutes. I'm sad I kind of caught the tail end of it, unfortunately, but it sounds like it's been an amazing session here with everybody. We at AIA California have been continually inspired by the efforts of AIA Los Angeles' members to advocate for both the architecture profession and the communities which we all serve. This symposium represents yet another example of such positive efforts, and I'm proud to be amongst such good company here today. I'm here today on behalf of the AIA California Board of Directors with a special announcement to recognize one California member who has demonstrated his lifetime commitment to these principles, Charles Ely, FAIA. The Lifetime Achievement Award is presented to an individual or group in recognition of an outstanding contribution to the improvement of the built environment and to the aims and goals of the profession of architecture in California. This announcement may be a surprise for Charles. Many of his peers, including many of you in attendance today, supported his nomination for this award. Charles has worked for decades to create a number of performance-based building and energy codes. Charles's fresh and innovative approach formed the basis of California's energy efficiency standards for over 30 years. We'll be having a public celebration to recognize Charles later this year, but I wanted to take this opportunity to announce his selection amongst those who recognize him as a global leader in our profession. Congratulations, Charles, and I want to give you an opportunity to say a few words if you'd like.
Oh, wow, what a surprise. Thank you, Brett, and thank you to the California AI Board of Directors. And I'll just leave it at that. I let Ed and Farana carry on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is Ed. I'd just like to add, we work with Charles day in and day out, and Charles has been unbelievable in helping us move things along, especially in California, and that affects that goes out to the world. So we couldn't be prouder to work with him.
Thank you. Thank you for the few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Ed. And thank you, Charles, for your contribution. I'm honored to welcome an incredible and talented group of leaders in our industry and panel one on carbon neutrality. Please welcome Grant Irvin, Chief Resilient Officer, City of Pittsburgh, Julie Hendricks, Director of Design and Construction, UCSB, Natalie Tier, Vice President, Sustainability and Social Impact, Hudson Pacific Properties, Robin Eason, Senior Sustainability Planner, West Hollywood. I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, Miranda Garten, Associate AIA, Lead Fellow, Vice President, Sustainability Design Leader at HKS Inc. Miranda, thank you.
Thank you, Ismar. And if my panelists could turn on their cameras, that would be wonderful. So exciting to be here this morning. Wonderful to hear all these words. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a quick second here to say that myself, Ismar, the rest of COAT and AIA are not only happy to have you here, but we are committed to making sure that this is an equitable, diverse group of speakers and attendees at our events going forward. If you didn't take a look at the roster this year, of the 60 experts that we have, only 8 are repeat speakers. 50%, over 50% of our speakers are women, and 1/3 are BIPOC. So please keep those submissions coming for speakers in the future. We have more events we're planning. And again, we want to be sure this is a very diverse community that we're speaking and talking to. That said, as Ismar mentioned, my name is Miranda Gardner. I'm a Vice President and a Sustainable Design Leader here at HKS Architects. I have the privilege of moderating our first panel this morning on climate neutrality. And our 4 experts are going to take a few minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their organizations, and of course, their efforts towards climate neutrality. I'm going to kick this off with a good friend of mine and a wonderful expert, Ms. Robin Eason. Robin?
Thanks, Miranda. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. I'm Robin Eason. I'm the Senior Sustainability Planner with the City of West Hollywood, and I use she and her pronouns. I noticed in the chat that there are people from all geographies, so just to orient some folks as to where West Hollywood is, I like to refer to us as a tiny but mighty 1.9 square mile city in the heart of Los Angeles County. We are directly east of the city of Beverly Hills. And in 2001, we adopted a strategic plan, and it established 6 core values, one of which was responsibility for the environment. And that really kind of enabled our city to pass a number of landmark environmental policies and really set the stage for aggressive action towards greenhouse gas emission reductions, be it local green building program, be it initiatives to support transportation electrification, be it becoming 100% green power city with the Clean Power Alliance in 2017, or be it adopting our climate action plan in 2011. And so I've been with the city since 2016 to really kind of accelerate all of those climate action efforts. And my project right now, or my focus right now, is a project called We Hold Climate Action, which is really an update to that 10-year-old climate action plan. And we have 3 goals in mind with that. We want to be carbon neutral by an undetermined horizon year. It's been really inspiring to see the speakers before us just talk about what cities can do to be part of the solution. We want to prepare and build resilience against climate threats, ours being specifically extreme heat and extreme drought. And lastly, we want to center this process in equity and reciprocity. So I'm happy to be here today with all of you, and I'm going to kick it over to the next speaker to introduce themselves.
Grant, I see you in the participant list. You ready?
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Thanks, Miranda and Robin, and for all you, good morning. It's good afternoon here on the East Coast. My name is Grant Irvin, and I serve as the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Pittsburgh. It's been my pleasure to serve at the city for about 7.5 years now, where I've had the opportunity to develop both our climate action strategy as well as our 1PGH resilience plan. And my role really kind of focuses in on the intersections of both the internal operations of city government, but also the role the city has with regards to how we can build a more sustainable, resilient, and just city. So with that, I have the ability to kind of integrate across sectors as well as kind of interdepartmentally. So I get a little bit of operations and a little bit of strategy. And one of the key kind of components of our work in Pittsburgh underneath our climate action plan has been our role with regards to the built environment. So one of our key partners is our Green Building Alliance, as well as AIA Pittsburgh, who are kind of key integrators with us in terms of reaching our 50% emissions reduction goal by the year 2030 and onwards towards our 80% emissions reduction goal by the year 2050. So trying to use all the tools in our toolbox to help reach those emissions reduction targets. And I'll pass it back to you, Miranda. Thanks.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Brenda. So I'm Julie Hendricks. I am the Director of Design and Construction Services and the Campus Architect at the University of California at Santa Barbara. My career in higher education has really been focused around both sustainability and carbon neutrality. I spent about 15 years at the California Community College system, working hard towards sustainability efforts in that area, and then moved over to the University of California about 3 years ago. And I'm really proud to do so. The University of California in 2013, under Janet Napolitano, established a carbon neutrality initiative, and that's to ensure that all of University of California, which comprises, as you would imagine, quite a few campuses, reach net zero greenhouse gases by 2025. And so really my role is to support our campus's ability to achieve that lofty goal and to really continue those efforts within the UC system. So I'm really excited to be here today. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. Natalie's here. It is such a pleasure to be here. I just have to say, an honor to follow you, Ed. You're always an inspiration, and wonderful to be on with this broader, diverse group. And I love seeing all the great ideas happening in the chat. So thanks for having me. I lead sustainability at Hudson Pacific. We're a large commercial office and studio real estate investment trust headquartered in LA, but we have about 20 million square feet of properties from LA up to Vancouver. Primarily, we serve large tech, media, entertainment tenants, think Google, Netflix, Amazon, et cetera. And so because of the geographies that we're in and the types of customers that we serve, sustainability is core to our whole business model, and which means I have a really fun job. And part of that is we went fully carbon neutral last year, net zero carbon for all scope 1 and 2 emissions. And we do take the financial control approach to greenhouse gas accounting. So we include tenant emissions in our scope 1 and 2. We did that through a combination of energy efficiency. We've got 71% of our portfolio by square footage is Energy Star certified, 80% is LEED certified. So we've got a quite energy efficient portfolio already, and we've also invested heavily in both on-site but primarily off-site renewable electricity procurement. And then we leveraged RECs and offsets to bring the remaining emissions down to zero. That was cool. I'm really proud that we did that. But we also have a science-based target to reduce our emissions 50% by 2030, meaning we would like to be less reliant on the RECs and offsets and reduce our gross emissions. And we'll do that primarily, I imagine, through offsite renewable electricity agreements, trying to drive additional local to our grid projects wherever we can, but balancing cost and administrative burdens along the way. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all. Let's get into the heart of this. If you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. I'm not going to guarantee that we're going to be able to get to them in our short timeline. That said, hang on to them for your lunch thinks, because there's a lot of great topics in the lunch think sessions, and they're going to be ready to discuss all those questions with you too. So question one, we're here with a bunch of architects primarily. How do we marry aesthetics and building performance? Is it inevitable that there's going to be a trade-off that one has to suffer for the other? Or is this a conversation or a piece of the puzzle that we have to reframe, rethink our definition of beauty and good design coming together? Grant, I'm going to punt it to you to start this one off.
Thanks, Miranda. I appreciate it. This question is actually, it really hits home because it's a challenge that we're dealing with literally at this moment in the city of Pittsburgh. So last year we passed our net zero ordinances, so a net zero code for all city facilities. And, working with partners like the Rocky Mountain Institute and a number of kind of energy advisors, we were able to model the efficiency of our buildings and what we needed to do in terms of hitting an EUI standard across our portfolio. What we didn't kind of calculate, though, was the challenges that we would have with the design community, specifically with our art commission, which has oversight of public facilities in terms of their aesthetic impact on the public realm. And one of the big things that we've recognized that there is a chasm that we are experiencing in terms of education, both with the climate crisis as well as the understandings and the impacts of contextual design. And so we've tried to meet this challenge by bringing along kind of a philosophy that we have here called drill down to draw down, which is to work with kind of our team inside of our public works facilities, our architect division, and now start to do some of that outreach. My sense, though, is that they can be married, but we have to be able to understand that we need to be on a common footing. And some of those practices are going to require trade-offs. Both in terms of material selection, but not necessarily in terms of aesthetics, which I think requires a greater community conversation.
Couldn't agree with you more. Julie, I know in our earlier sessions, you kind of brought up the point of one size doesn't fit all. How does that apply to this question here?
Yeah, it's a does form follow function, I guess, that whole statement, and what is aesthetics and what is beauty and design? I mean, I really do think that, there's a lot of subjectivity in that question, but I think, for the University of California, we have, a couple of really great opportunities. One being that we have this huge portfolio of existing buildings. And so, here's an opportunity for us to take what we already have and really transform, this set of buildings into and utilize what's there and really reuse and make it into an aesthetically pleasing, low carbon impact, transformation. I think that's definitely one of our opportunities. And then I think the other one too is to really utilize our building infrastructure and design and reuse our existing buildings as an educational institution, as tools to really, kind of as Grant is saying, to educate and to instruct others in terms of, just because we're making this commitment to carbon neutrality or sustainability, it doesn't mean that we're sacrificing aesthetics or beauty.
Robin, I know you're dealing with that in spades in West Hollywood. For those that don't know, West Hollywood is very committed to keeping their aesthetic going. And so how is that working with your policies and plans going forward with sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, I think I'm really echoing Grant and Julie. It's really about working with the community, kind of diving deep into, the sentimentality that people might have to some of our existing building stock, especially city facilities that they've known to be one way for a long period of time. And just having those conversations with them about the fact that, the ultimate goal is to enhance these spaces so that you can, have a celebrated experience within these spaces for years to come, but in ways that have a multiple benefit to, the health and safety of the community, but in ways that can also then really have these beacons become a beacon within the community and within the city itself.
Natalie, a little bit maybe of a pivot here. You're dealing with a lot of maintenance and operation in your facilities. I mean, again, how does this play into this kind of dialogue? Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting question because for us, the aesthetics really are not the barrier, and just due to the types of buildings we have, and we don't have with the exception of the Ferry building in San Francisco, we don't have any historic buildings, and we're not dealing with the same issues you are, Robin. However, we're very involved in a trade-off discussion at the moment, which I'm sure is impacting this group too, around health and safety and sustainability. And actually one reason why we transitioned to net zero carbon last year, which is actually 5 years ahead of schedule for us, is because we saw the implications that COVID was going to have on our energy use as we needed to run our HVAC systems longer and harder and bring in more outside air and keep our buildings comfortable for our tenants. We just were unwilling to allow our carbon footprint to grow as our energy grows, and we think it will in the future. And so we just had to decouple them completely. That's our solution for now. It's not obviously a sustainable long-term solution, so we're going to have to keep working on that one.
Great segue though to our next and our kind of follow-up question on this one. Someone pinged in the chat that the Apple campus is a great example of marrying both. There are examples all over the country, all over the world that marry both. From your all's opinions, what is working, what isn't working when we're getting to climate neutrality goals and implementation, and where does kind of financing and money fall into this picture too? Because I know from our side, it's always the question our clients ask: how much am I paying and how much am I going to see as an ROI? Julie, do you want to start this one for us?
It's tough for sure. I still feel like that the whole carbon neutrality, sustainability discussion is still somewhat of an outlier and does not live within the mainstream. I get frustrated that I constantly feel somewhat of a pause before launching into, suggestions or bringing up the conversation. And so I agree, Miranda. One of the things is, cost and what are the impacts there. But let's just really embed it into the broader discussion about, how we approach planning, design, operations, maintenance, and quit trying to keep it as a separate discussion. I think that's one of my biggest challenges, is trying to really, marry those two together.
Absolutely. Grant and Robin, I know you're coming at it from city budgets, which most of us don't experience, but know a little bit about, and they tend to run tighter than what we're working with. Grant's already laughing at me because he knows where I'm going with this. So Grant, talk to us about this one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, the bright light, I think, is a lot of cities are setting targets, right? So whether it's through, climate plans or 2030 district challenge and things of that nature, that there's a standard that's being set. But, I share Julie's frustration, because effectively what we have to do is change the systems of review and enabling a new operating environment. One of the things, just two examples that we're working on in Pittsburgh, is trying to embed the conversation of energy into design review. So as projects come through kind of our planning department, that idea of energy systems, and building design is incorporated in the quote unquote general process of reviewing a project. The other thing that we're trying to work on with regards to our own portfolio is introduce, and this is also a somewhat of a frontier, introduce new financing tools. So whether it's the ability to use energy service and contracting or performance-based budgeting, or kind of, really shifting the shoulder of the burden from your capital expenditures into your operating expenditures is another kind of opportunity, I think, in order to enable a lot of sustainability and performance measures.
Yeah, and I would just add, in terms of what's working, I agree with what's been said before, but I am encouraged by the fact that the conversation is happening at multiple different levels. I'm constantly, in conversations with the state, with regional partners, with utilities, with a number of different stakeholders representing, different territories. And we're all talking about carbon neutrality, even if there's different pathways to get there, and so I think that that's really encouraging. And, yesterday I was just on a call for the League of Cities, and it was with a bunch of elected officials, and they were all excited about carbon neutrality and sustainability. And it was just great to be on a call where our city leaders are actually saying those words and, pushing for having staff that are knowledgeable in this area that can really help cities, achieve some of the targets that Grant was saying. I think that that's a huge and an important discussion that wasn't happening, even just 5 years ago. With respect to budgets and ROI, which is really important now that we're in the era of this pandemic, I think for a number of cities, it's about partnerships, and it's about figuring out how you can think about innovative ways to experiment with different strategies to get us where we want to go. In West Hollywood, we're small enough where we're attractive to different vendors that want to use us as a laboratory to experiment with, different innovations in transportation or in climate change. And so that's been really great to be able to have a pilot program, say, for 6 months to a year, to be able to focus on different things that we can see if that's going to help our cities get to the next step, and then give them feedback on, what that technology can do. Because we're a small city, we're also always looking for other cities or other entities to partner with or leverage. An example would be the Clean Power Alliance. That territory now is huge within Southern California. So they have the muscle to be able to get the grant monies from the state to proliferate, different sustainability initiatives. And so as a member organization of that entity, we're able to then leverage, their power, their money, their resources to do what we want to do in West Hollywood, but also be a part of the solution for the region as well. So just thinking outside the box about ways that we can, leverage our intellectual power if we don't necessarily have the finances to do all the things that we might want to do to get to carbon neutrality.
Well, you're just teeing each other up for me. I don't even need to be part of this conversation. Natalie, I know you all at Hudson Pacific have training programs. Something we discussed earlier was the kind of marrying and matching of vendors. Can you get into that a bit more for our attendees today?
For vendors, sure. Well, and maybe I see a question in the chat from Ben about the ROI question and landlords. And I guess perhaps just to tie back to ROI for how that plays out for us. It plays out really differently depending on whether we're talking about ROI for existing building decarb or new buildings, and we do both. For existing buildings, then your question is right on, that it is a lot of those costs mostly do get passed along to tenants. But the reality is it's super complicated in the ways that it passes. That actually happens. We have thousands of leases, each one has different terms, some are base year, some are not. We have a lot of costs that we pass on, and we don't succeed in passing on 100% of those costs. And so in renewable energy is just one of many. So the short answer is it's really complicated the way that plays out. On the new building side, the ROI tends actually to be, because of the type of buildings that we're developing, there tends to be actually a case for it primarily in the role it plays in pre-leasing. So at our new Epic development in Hollywood, which is Netflix tower, has building integrated photovoltaics that were an additional cost for the building, but it was the first time that technology was used at scale in this type of building in LA County. So it was differentiating. We think it played a role in our ability to pre-lease that to Netflix. We're looking at something similar with a mass timber building, in another place in our portfolio right now, which will be at 16 stories, the tallest mass timber structure in that city. And that's also extra costs, but we think it's differentiating and will pay itself back eventually, in addition to being the right thing to do.
There we go. That's how we make this happen. I'm going to throw the panel a little bit of a curveball here, but I think it's a timely question that I see in the chat, and I think it'll pose some great responses from our friends David and Carla. Obviously, a lot of companies are moving remote right now. So how are you all seeing within your organizations, dealing with, they put it as empty corporate space, but Julie, I know you've got sort of an empty campus right now. Our cities are a little bit empty. Retail spaces, especially hospitality, are kind of in a weird zone right now where not a lot of people are there. We all want to support small businesses. We all want to help with sustainabilities, but there's energy, there's maintenance costs, there's employee safety. Can you touch and highlight on any of kind of those topics that are really related to what we've seen over the last year in the pandemic?
I'll hop in. One of the things that I always like to harken back to, and it was like, almost a year ago at this time that we kind of began this, we'll call it pandemic process of self-discovery. And if you can harken back to like those, the early couple months, some of the things that we all experienced was the impact of the reduced impact on our environment. Cleaner air, the ability to hear in our cities, because of the lack of pollution and the impacts that we make because of our human footprint. And that in some cases gives us a baseline of what the future can be, right? And so, when we think about kind of cities and how we rethink our cities for a post-pandemic world, two things come to mind quickly. One is the opportunity to integrate the natural environment into the built environment. So how do you start to create, a more biophilic approach or kind of a harmony with nature in terms of the intersection between those two environments? The second is, I think for cities, the importance of mixed use and the ability to not design for a single purpose is really important from a resilience standpoint, and that it gives us greater flexibilities to adapt to these challenges. You heard that in kind of Ed's presentation, that it's not density that is the problem, right? That we have an opportunity to create a strong urban fabric and be able to kind of live with that in a post-pandemic world. The third thing that I would say related to this in terms of our own operations, I think it has also taught us to be smarter. So there's these opportunities and tools that have been around for ages. And I'll give you an example of one, which is energy curtailment or demand response. So the ability to kind of make our systems of operations smarter and more reflexive based upon occupancy and use types, and leveraging technology into our facilities is really a critical tool that I think we've discovered.
I'll go ahead and jump in because like you said, Miranda, our perspective, the higher education or education in general is different, right? I think we've all seen that remote education is somewhat questionable. And so I think for education in general, the goal is to really get back to in-person instruction, because there's definitely, something to be said for in-person instruction. But I think what's interesting, there's a couple of things that have happened. I mean, ironically, our biggest construction project right now is a new classroom building. So, that clearly illustrates the goal that we do intend to come back together. But it has given us the opportunity to jump into our buildings and do assessments, both in terms of like air quality and air movement, but also efficiency within our existing buildings to be sure that our buildings are operating efficiently and the air systems are also operating efficiently. So we've taken the opportunity, but and especially for many of the UC campuses, we're a pretty sustainable operation when we're in operation because we don't have a lot of commuting happening. So we're kind of a closed loop system with our students mostly living either on campus or very nearby. So really, I think we're focusing on getting back to that model. But I know that my prior experience in community college, they've dabbled a lot more with a more balanced, remote learning with in class, lecture style learning. So I know that there's different approaches throughout higher education. But I think for our institution, UC, we're really striving to get back to where we were.
The thing I want to add, I just put in the chat. We did kind of a little study with our intern on West Hollywood's sort of 15-minute neighborhoods, and over the last 30 years, we really invested a lot in our planning, zoning, and land use regulations to really bolster the need to have mixed use neighborhoods and really make sure that our corridors are a symbol of that. And so I think what we found over the last year was that in some ways, West Hollywood was sort of built to handle a pandemic like this because really anywhere you are in the city, if you live in West Hollywood and you are able-bodied, you can walk or bike to a basic service. And that was sort of really kind of an amazing kind of realization to come across, recognizing the fact that we were all dealing with kind of a stay-at-home order. And so, as we start to move, I guess, out of this into recovery, it doesn't mean that West Hollywood hasn't been hit hard. We've had a number of businesses close down along those corridors. And so we're going to have to reimagine what those spaces are going to be like. And I think we might have to loosen some of those hard zoning regulations to allow for different type of uses to come and be in those spaces for a bit, to understand what they can turn into, if not the space that they were intended to or have been for the last 20 years. So I think a lot of cities are going to be grappling with that. And in particular, if they don't have sustainable land use policies, making sure that they prioritize that as part of their climate action planning.
Absolutely, that design for flexibility. How do we ensure that we're changing spaces and yet not adding to the problem? We're not just demoing buildings. We're not just making and creating additional waste. We're not just overusing our water and energy while we kind of make these adjustments. Natalie, I'm sure you've seen it very differently, especially with a lot of your film studios, quiet for a while. Now they're back in action.
Yeah. I mean, this whole thing is completely it's been like an existential threat to our whole business model. People decided offices weren't needed for the last year. So we have, from a sustainability perspective, we've done our best to use that as an opportunity to drive energy efficiency improvements and do treasure hunts and capital improvements without people in the building. And so there's been benefits there. We have seen on average about a 30 to 40% drop in energy use across the portfolio, but it's also helped us discover some things that we need to change about the way we do business. And Robin's changing the way that the city works, and some of that is around some of our lease terms and discovering language buried in there around our obligation to keep spaces at a certain temperature and operational, even when people aren't there for months at a time. And so we're rethinking our standard lease language going forward to kind of be a little bit more aggressive on the green lease terms that we use as our starting point. We're also thinking about even just like our ground floor retailers. We've restructured we've given rent relief and restructured our lease agreements with them throughout the pandemic. And that may be something that continues over time. And the way that retailers strike leases with landlords will probably change in a really big way. And then, as you said, Miranda, we've discovered these crazy differences within our portfolio. Our office has been very quiet our studio portfolio has never been busier. It's totally crazy because there's just such a thirst for more content. So everyone sits at home watching Netflix. And so we are just booming with people trying to get into our stages, and also all the location shoots that people used to do outside of LA. Productions aren't traveling anymore. And so there's more demand for LA based production, which has, as you can imagine, is having some really big strategic implications for where we think our business will grow.
You all keep talking about all these kind of integrated items, connecting the dots. I see in the chat too, Kate is jumping in, Angie's jumping in. Keep participating in this chat. As I said before too, we've got a lot of lunch things coming up where more discussions and dialogues can happen between our participants. So kind of closing this session out this morning, and to tie us into our session 2 here, how do you think your carbon neutrality goals, or in general carbon neutrality goals, impact and connect to resiliency planning? Grant, you've already got resiliency in your title, so I'm going to let you go a little bit further down the line because I know you've got ideas. Robin, do you want to kick us off for this question? Bring us home here.
Yeah, it's something that we're grappling with right now as we develop our WeHo Climate Action Project and really think about what this time has meant in terms of how that document can be really informative to the city about how we move forward. And so the thing I guess I would want to focus on right now is just how we're investing in the conversation around social connectedness and community resiliency. West Hollywood has done a really great job over the last several years investing in its social services infrastructure. And what that has meant is that we knew early on where a number of our vulnerable populations were. And what that also then means is that it is imperative that we empower them to be able to not only be able to know each other and take care of each other, but particularly in times of, shocks and stressors, be able to come together and, move forward and have the information that they need to take care of themselves during special emergency events. And so we're trying to find the language and work with the community to understand maybe where some of those gaps might lie within our city right now, and figure out as we move forward with different adaptive capacity strategies, how do we move forward with strengthening those connections while also doing what the city needs to do related to protections from climate threats. And so we're not completely clear how that's going to look once this plan is done, but I feel confident that we're moving forward in the right direction related to some social resiliency efforts.
Wonderful. And Natalie and Julie, you guys have the sort of coastal portfolio of resiliency here. Natalie, LA, San Francisco, Vancouver, you name it, you're right there. Julie, Santa Barbara. Where does that piece come into this dialogue that we're having this morning?
I cannot agree more with the comment that just showed up in the chat around that it's equity and housing and community resiliency is more important than anything else here. It's just completely unacceptable what has happened at the divisions in our society and how many the people are unhoused in LA particularly, but in all of the cities that we're in. I mean, there is a climate crisis for sure, but there's also a true humanitarian crisis that's happening right now. And that is a fundamental business threat also, by the way, to organizations like us and other big landlords that have not just a moral imperative, but a business imperative to address it.
Yeah, Julie, you're in the mix of training the next generation of our future leaders, how they're going to be handling this. I'm sure there's a lot of crossover between the work that you're doing and the education of your students.
It is really interesting. And the nexus really is between the two is research and education. And so as I was sitting on a resiliency committee and planning yesterday, it was so interesting to watch how that cycles back into the carbon neutrality and the sustainability. And it just really creates this full cycle loop that, the two are just interconnected. There's no two ways about it. And I would say, for UC or for higher education in general, that research and education component is really the piece that, bridges the two together. So it's really kind of a beautiful and eloquent connection between the two.
Absolutely. Out to the East Coast, Grant.
Yeah, a couple of things that I would add, just from an East Coast perspective, and I know that some of your members are doing work around the country, is that the conversation around climate resilience needs to be put to the forefront in inland communities as well. A lot of our climate conversation, and this is no offense to a California audience, but is focused on our coasts, whether that's a hurricane or a forest fire, and for just reason. What inland communities are struggling with are, the slow moving challenges that are easily assumed to be a part of the normal cycle of operations, and they're not. Just for example, I was working with some colleagues in Cincinnati yesterday, and collectively we've had $50 million of impacts on municipal operations from landslides because of seeing 2 times the amount of precipitation over the last couple of years. So those impacts are being felt across the country. One of the things that I would lead, is kind of the opportunity really for architects, because of your role, is the opportunity to be integrators. And what we see in kind of the resilience space, one of the terms that we often use is the idea of co-benefits, or the resilience dividend. And that is, the challenges of climate and justice are not isolated in and to themselves. They are integrated challenges. So when we think about how we can address these, they need to be brought together at the forefront in order to develop solutions for them in the built and natural environment. And so that's really, I think, the opportunity is to start to think more like integrators and to be able to deliver these co-benefits in the projects we're developing.
Absolutely. And what a way to kind of close this out for us this morning. What I heard, and I hope the rest of you all heard, is, our technology is here, our experts are here, a lot of you in this room right now. Now we need to keep implementing, keeping in mind things like health and safety, community goals, taking care of our vulnerable populations, and ensuring that both climate neutrality and resiliency are part of the conversation in all of these design, policy, economic conversations that we are having. I'm getting ready to hand this over to our panel 2 here. George Riley, are you ready to take us through our resiliency panel moving forward?
Hey, thank you, Miranda. Yes, we're ready to go here at our end. Ismar, do you want to do the formal introductions of the panel?
Sure, I'd love to do that. Thank you, George. And thank you for a wonderful panel. Natalie, Julie, Grant, Robin, that was amazing. And thank you, Miranda. Thank you for moving it along and including everybody that is watching. Thank you. So today we're going to talk. So now we're going to talk about Reimagine the future of resiliency. So please let's welcome Danielle Horton, founder and president of Berdari Partners, Victor Ogay, principal of Rocky Mountain Institute, Zoe Elizabeth, senior energy consultant at SVCE, and Heather Rosenberg, associate principal at ARP. This panel will be moderated by George Riley, associate principal at Peril. Take it away.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introductions. We're about to kick off here. I'm actually a native of Glasgow. That's my hometown. So I'm quite proud and hopeful that, my town can be associated with the next step towards action on climate injustice and climate change. So fingers crossed that we use that springboard for what it's intended to be, and we can start to see some real change and build on momentum. So I want to just kick us off here, firstly with an introduction to our panelists. We can set the stage, but what we're finding at the moment is resiliency is such a buzzword around not only our industry, but also the media at large. So I'd like the panelists to give an introduction to themselves and also talk specifically about what resiliency means in their subject to set the stage for our formal discussion. And Victor, I will kick you off and present your screen on my end.
Thank you, George. First off, I would love to have your accent from Glasgow, but I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. Can you put the first slide up for me? I'm an architect with RMI, with Rocky Mountain Institute, and coming to you from Boulder, Colorado today. And I would like to talk a little bit about an architectural design approach to resilience. So I'm not seeing the slides. I don't know, George, if that's something you can.
No worries. There you go.
There we go.
Coming up.
Excellent. So 3 approaches that I want to think about. Design for connection, design for off, and design for change. And so go through them in that order. And the first rule of ecology is that everything is connected to everything else. And so if we're designing buildings as if they're independent of that, it's not only wrong, but it's also really missing a lot of opportunity. And so we should think about how our buildings connect together, both to the environment, to the utilities, and to the communities. So this is an image of Stone Edge Farm near Sonoma. And when the fires came through Santa Rosa a few years ago, this vineyard was able to actually isolate itself, has some storage, and was able to basically continue to island and operate while,